Okay, welcome to part 2 of looking at the Paradise Brothel in Germany, a brothel that was busted 3 times for human trafficking. But I really have to say, I was thinking about doing the same video in German for a German audience, and I don't think I will. Because it just wouldn't shock them. Because we all grew up with TV that looked like that showed us women in that light, that presented prostitution in that light. Yeah, just a normal part of society. Like, how many adults in the last part did we see saying it's inevitable, there's nothing to be done about this, that's just the way that life is, just deal with it. Yeah, let's see what else the video has in store, because I think unless you grew up essentially being groomed by that kind of media, you would be deeply shocked.
Auch die Prostituierten zahlen Eintritt, denn die Damen hier arbeiten auf eigene Rechnung als selbstständige Gewerbetreibende in Sachen Sex.
That means that the brothel owner can't tell them you gotta go and do this or that sex act with that John, like in theory. In practice, that does still happen, and because we know that human trafficking was rife in that brothel. But the other part of being self-employed is you get none of the benefits. No holiday pay, no sick pay, no maternal leave. The moment that you can't work or don't want to for whatever reason, you're eating into your savings. Everyone, especially on the left, is ragging on the gig economy. Everyone's talking about how that makes people so financially insecure. There's so many risks involved with that. The moment that you hear self-employed in the brothel, everyone's like, that's liberatory. That's women taking charge of their lives. When that's like, be that a porn studio, a strip club, or a brothel, that's how it works. Because the third parties are alleviating most responsibilities they have towards the women that you would as an actual employer. But at the end of the day, whether it's poverty that's the pimp or a regular old flesh and blood pimp, women are, of course, all the time going to private rooms with Johns that they're disgusted by, that they fear, having to do dangerous, disgusting sex acts. Like, self-employed sounds good. Think about it for just 2 minutes. It's not. And I'm not saying that if she did have a work contract, it'd be better. Either way, this industry works in a way that third parties get the most out of it.
Was sie mit den Freiern aushandeln, ist ihre Sache. Unverbindliche Preisempfehlung, ab 50 € die halbe Stunde.
50 euros for half an hour. Just all of you who talk to me about how women are making like 250 for half an hour. Just listen to the actual prices. Now, she might earn more, but that means she has to do more. She might earn more for not using a condom, which is like, that could kill you. She might get more if she does anal. She might get more if she kisses him, because most women don't want to kiss Johns, because that's, I mean, first of all, whatever he's got in his mouth, like, you have to taste that. If he's got a sore, if he's sick, that's getting passed on too. But also many women view kissing as quite an intimate act that they'd rather only do, with a boyfriend, a partner. And they don't want to do that with the Johns. And it's sort of a barrier that many women want to keep, and the only way that they might relinquish that barrier is extra payment. And that's how you might end up with more than $50.
Katja ist nur ab und zu im Club, Teilzeithure sozusagen. Hauptberuflich arbeitet sie in einem ganz normalen Büro.
That's also not uncommon. That would be the German women, many of whom are in prostitution more temporary and usually have a day job. That way you avoid having a gap in your resume. So if she wants to move out from that day job to another one, she doesn't have to say, well, I spent half a year in a brothel. That's very unlike the migrant women, to whom often the brothel is their world. There is nothing else until they move on to the next one in another city, or maybe in the Netherlands or Italy or somewhere else.
Finanzielle Engpässe haben sie zu diesem Nebenjob hier getrieben.
And she's not doing it out of fun. Again, the German women too, they just need cash. It's like literally, I'm struggling to pay my rent. I'm struggling to pay for food. Like, if you listen to German women who speak the language, who were born here, you listen to their stories, poverty, neglect, and sexual trauma is the absolute norm. And we have studies that confirm that as well.
Man lernt irgendwann mal damit umzugehen. Es ist ein Geschäft. Man lernt abzuschalten, privat und geschäftlich zu trennen.
I don't know this woman's personal story, but I hear a lot of these stories from women who say, well, I may not love it, but it's sort of okay for me. And they talk a lot about, switching off. She just said that, I switch off. And that like, if a friend said that to me, like, I switch off during sex with my boyfriend, I'd be like, I'd be concerned and worried because that kind of sounds like she's not enjoying it. She doesn't want it. Could be dissociation, which is a trauma reaction that happens, especially to rape victims. So you're not feeling your body quite as much as you would be if you were fully conscious and present. Like, you have to smell that guy, feel his skin, his hair, his nails, his everything. And if you dissociate, there is this mental barrier between you and the guy. And that's sort of a way that the brain protects you from trauma in the short term. In the long term, those memories, if they're traumatic, they will haunt you. So it's a temporary help, but a long-term problem, because a lot of women then report, well, I'm actually dissociating all the time, even when I'm actually like a guy. So I don't know if that's what's going on with this woman, but if you listen to a lot of women who are currently in the trade, there's some things in what they tell us that's, if a friend said that to me, I'd be concerned. So why do we always only look at the final sentence where she says, like, it's okay for me, and we don't listen to the rest?
Das war schwierig am Anfang?
Auf jeden Fall. Das war sehr schwierig, ja. Weil du dann auch öfters in der Arbeit hörst, oh, das ist gar nicht für dich und wieso machst du das? Und sowas musst du dir dann von einem Mann anhören, der 5 Minuten später dann sagt, oh ja, du bist so geil und oh und dies und jenes, und das ist dann schon krass.
That's the thing that Johns do all the time. They go to women and say, you're too good for this. And then they just use her anyway. You're like, you seem like a normal woman. You speak German, you're educated, you have a job. What are you doing here? What's a girl like you doing here? What she just told us is really concerning. She said it was very hard. If your friend said to you having sex with her boyfriend was very hard for a long time, would you be concerned? Yes. Why is it different? Because there's money involved. Is sexual consent, like, do the parameters change because of money? Can I just buy my weight out of consideration for my sexual partners? No.
Thema Doppelmoral.
PR-Mann Michael Beretin geht mit Jürgen Rudloff, dem Betreiber des Clubs, die Zeitungen durch. Gerade jetzt am Anfang sorgt der Club für etliche Schlagzeilen und für manch moralische Empörung.
And that's the mega pimp, right? That's Jürgen Rudloff. I've quoted him along. That's the guy who later says when he's in court for knowingly profiting from a decade plus of human trafficking, says it is not possible to run a mega brothel without the help of organized crime because there is a lack of volunteers. Volunteers like the woman we just saw earlier who's doing out of desperation and who struggled. So very voluntary, right? But you don't even have enough women financially desperate. You need human trafficking. That's the guy, that's him. Again, I'm doing the job of journalists for them, and I'm researching who this guy is. I have a little bit of background on him. Jürgen Rudloff, his rep sheet, just like the marketing expert that we saw before, goes all the way back to the 80s. He was also done for illegal driving, serious fraud, and involved in a series of violent robberies, for which he got 10 years in prison, but they let him out after 7. And then in 2009, he started this brothel, right? The Paradise, which is what we're watching right now, after he had run a real estate company to the ground. I have no idea how men like this get investors, but they definitely get permits to open brothels. So just FYI, these men were all totally shady before the brothel opened. So no one could have seen any violence or crime coming with people like these. And in 2011 already, so that this after this TV clip, but way before they were sentenced, both Rudloff and Beretin wrote the foreword to a photo album of members of the rocker club Hells Angels, of the organized crime syndicate Hells Angels. So their associations with those groups had been known and basically official for a very long time. He was still invited on TV. He became the face of so-called clean, ethical prostitution, and he was that for about a decade. Now he's been replaced with other people. Now there's new people who are supposedly the clean face. It would not surprise me if in a few years we hear some really, really shady things about those kinds of people too. We have good reason to be mistrustful, let's say that.
Aber, meint der Chef, auch das ist letztlich Werbung für uns.
We're feminists, we're sometimes accused of like promoting the sex trade by criticizing it, because then like sexist men are going to see that and that's going to make them go to the brothel. I think someone like that didn't need much push to go if that's what makes him do it in the end. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in if you tell men, look here, you can exploit women for $50, that puts the idea in their head. They would have found out about that sooner or later. If we're silent about any human rights violation that someone might jump on because we talk about them, we could never talk about anything. So
Der gebürtige Stuttgarter kennt das Geschäft gut.
Früher war es mal so, dass die Damen halt einfach aus Spaß an der Freude gearbeitet haben.
That's a fucking lie. It used to be that they were more German than migrant women. A lot of gens have talked about this, how the women who were sort of centrally driven by addiction are no longer in the trade, or there's not that many. There's now mostly these impoverished women from Eastern Europe, a lot of whom are trafficked. That's like now totally dominating the market. Just because she's German doesn't mean she chose it. We just saw that earlier, because she's such a nympho. Also, we know sexual abuse that's always been the case. It's always been a major factor other than just poverty or addiction. That goes for the German women too. Like, it's a total lie that women used to love prostitution and then came the Romanians. Like, I don't know where he's going with this, but I'm just telling you, he's a convicted human trafficker. Of course he's fucking lying to you.
Und,
Das gibt's also schon auch.
Das gibt es sicherlich auch. Aber die prozentuale Situation hat sich da geändert. Ja? Sicherlich, dass hier heutzutage, ob das eine Studentin ist, wo einfach im BAföG nicht zurechtkommt und einfach auch sich über Wasser keine finanzielle Unterstützung von der Familie bekommt, oder die Mutter von 2 Kindern, wo allein gelassen worden ist vom Mann und sich jetzt Familie ernähren muss bzw. Kinder aufziehen muss. Und diese Problemfälle, soziale Problemfälle gibt es natürlich auch.
I am amazed at the honesty. And yeah, that's what he profits from. He failed to mention the human trafficking, but he suddenly spoke quite honestly that poverty and lack of options is a big driver for the German women too. So, how many times are these like creepy, dangerous criminals with these really soft voices? Like, it's doubly terrifying.
Hi, wie geht's? Gut.
Astrid, die Hausdame, kontrolliert im ersten Stock die Entspannungsräume.
Die Zimmer sind abgesperrt heute. Nur ein paar. Es ist zwar viel los.
Nessie verwaltet die Zimmerschlüssel und schaut, dass alles immer schön sauber ist.
Alles sauber. Und gab es schon Probleme mit Flecken heute auf den Bettlaken? Nee, aber die Mädels sind heute sehr fleißig.
There's definitely a lot of shit jobs. I don't even want to know the kind of bodily fluids that these poor women have to clean up. Like, oof.
Astrid wurde uns als Frauenbeauftragte vorgestellt. Das ist eine lustige Umschreibung, lacht sie und bezeichnet sich lieber als Hausdame, die die Frauen betreut.
Frauenbeauftragte, just like, what's the English word for that? That's like someone, for example, at a university tasked with looking at, specifically the situation for female staff and female students. Like, are there enough accommodations for moms, for example? Are there accommodations for victims of harassment? That's what that term is for. That's the job. Unbelievably euphemistic to use that word in the context of a brothel.
Sie sorgt dafür, dass nur Mädchen mit gültigen Papieren hier arbeiten, ist da für Sorgen und Nöte. Und bei Problemen mit den Freiern ist sie es, die schlichtet.
So, from what I've read, when there's a conflict, and to make clear what a conflict is like, he thinks her price is too high. He thinks she should not use a condom. He thinks she wasn't enthusiastic enough. He thinks, she originally agreed to anal sex and then she changed her mind. Like, that's the kind of conflicts we're talking about. How insane is it that then a third person comes in and she has to make sure that, the woman doesn't start screaming and crying, and that John also isn't a dissatisfied customer. Unbelievable. If a woman doesn't want to do a sex act, it doesn't matter what the context is. There is no adjudicating that. Just think about how insane that is. Imagine if you argued with your lover of whatever duration about a sex act, and then someone else is called in to adjudicate. Like, insane.
Sie sehen hier Schlüsselbretter. Die sind durchnummeriert, genauso wie die Zimmer. Und da sind solche schönen Quasten, die hängen wir an die Zimmer, damit wir wissen, die sind besetzt, damit auch keiner reingeht, die Gäste stört. Und das ist für uns auch ganz wichtig, dass das von der Nummer her funktioniert, damit es da kein Durcheinander gibt. Damit es dann auch leichter wird, die Zimmer sauber zu halten, weil Sie sehen ja, es sind viele.
And you don't want to lock the doors because it's not unlikely that she might be assaulted and then she might, scream and run for help, or someone. You don't want to have to be breaking down the door. You don't want to disturb all the other guests at the spa just because the woman was assaulted. So that's why, a lot of brothels, there is no locking of doors. And that's why you have to prevent other people from walking in, because you can't just lock the door. # just a job.
Saubere Zimmer, saubere Handtücher. Im Hotel würde man das Zimmermädchen nennen, meint Nessie. Nur, dass sie hier eben nicht im Hotel arbeitet, sondern in einem FKK-Club.
Das ist einfach ein Job, wo man Geld verdienen kann. Fertig. Also es ist nichts Schlimmes. Was die Mädels machen, ist denen ihre Sache. Und was ich mache, ist meine Sache.
Aber gibt es denn da auch so Reaktionen, dass die Leute so sagen?
Natürlich gibt es immer, ja, was machst du da, wo stehst du da, an welchen Punkten, was weiß ich. Ja, meine Arbeit sind die Zimmer sauber machen, mich um die Mädels kümmern.
What too bad how much harassment that woman gets from Johns, right? Because she's young. Just saying, like, enduring sexual harassment is 100% a part of being in prostitution, and being a young woman around prostitution, 100%. Like, every woman that I've spoken to who's had that job, that's what she goes through on a daily basis. And again, it's very important to know the legal situation. So when prostitution becomes a job, the question becomes, can the job center then tell unemployed women to try this job and otherwise threaten them with withdrawal of benefits? And several women went to court so that the German state cannot legally force women into prostitution. But it's actually more than that. The state can also, through the job office, not force a woman to do Nessie's job, the woman we're seeing here. They cannot force her to become a barmaid or a cleaner or a receptionist at a brothel. I mean, that's the hypocrisy of our legislation. We call it a job all the time, and then we have these extra provisions. I'm glad we do. If we didn't, that'd be a horrific human rights violation. But yeah, we're in a state of hypocrisy saying, okay, the job office can't force you, but it's still also totally a normal job and not an extraordinarily dangerous and dehumanizing environment, even for the women who aren't themselves doing the sex selling or whatever you want to call it.
Michael Beretin. Eigentlich Marketingleiter und Pressesprecher, eher aber Mädchen für alles. Ist derweil auf dem Weg in die Waschküche im Keller. Ein Notruf.
Er hat geguckt, jetzt geht's wieder. Ich weiß nicht, wo das Wasser herkommt.
Was war's denn?
Das ist von hinten kam Wasser raus.
Eine Maschine ist ausgelaufen.
This helps make the business look normal, right? A hotel, like, you have all the things you have at a hotel. You gotta cook, you got cleaners, someone's doing the dry cleaning, right? Normal business. And it's clean. And don't you worry, when you come here, you're gonna have clean bed sheets. This is just an advertisement. I'm surprised at the bits of honesty we've seen so far, but you got to remember, at the end of the day, it's still an advertisement.
Sagt Beretin, ist mit Sicherheit noch ein Garantiefall.
Checker.
Chanel hat inzwischen geduscht und macht sich fertig zur Arbeit. Im Schminkraum ist heute allerdings die Hölle los. Achim, der fliegende Schuhhändler, ist da.
There are so many leeches on the sex trade, and I'm really not talking about the cooks and cleaners. In my eyes, they're exploited too. But the people who own businesses, I think something like a fourth, I read a huge number, it could be up to a fourth of German condom production goes into the sex trade. So the owner of that condom production, in my opinion, is basically also a pimp, or at least a co-pimp of some kind. There's these people who sell the clothes, what the women here are naked, but they still have to wear these unbelievable shoes that are so bad for your entire body. The person who owns a company with those shoes, it also profits from the sex trade. I don't know if we're going to see that. There's also plastic surgeons specialized in the sex trade. Can't legally call these people all pimps, but I would call them leeches.
Oh, die Weißen sind süß.
Schuhe könnte ich mir ständig kaufen, sagt Chanel. Aber wir können es uns auch leisten. Wer gut im Geschäft ist, kann über 10.000 € im Monat verdienen, meint sie.
And yeah, here you see some more grooming. They're telling you these women make so much money. Don't you feel sorry? They're basically all rich, right? They all go home to Romania and Bulgaria, and then they retire in a villa at 35. Which is a bunch of nonsense. I mean, first of all, again, we know that human trafficking happened. A huge amount of that money went to other people, right? But a lot of women exit the sex industry indebted. And also something that's hinted here, I don't know if that's the case for this woman, but it's a very common phenomenon that sometimes the women have very little cash, sometimes they have a lot. It has a little bit of a psychological effect that's similar to maybe like a lottery where you lose a lot but you win some, and that win gives you a thrill. So sometimes they have a lot of that cash, and that a cash too for many women has, a psychological burden because they're ashamed of how they earned it. The culture shames them. There might be traumatic memories attached to the cash, so they spend it quite quick, right? For example, buying shoes or buying perfumes, or buying clothes or buying maybe a holiday because you feel you need to treat yourself. You just went through something possibly traumatic, and the next thing you do is go treat yourself. It is possible to earn more in prostitution than you would in a regular job. That's not necessarily the case for the average woman. That is a piece of propaganda, but it is possible for some for a certain amount of time. That doesn't mean that money is then well managed, stays in her hand, is invested wisely. And I'm not trying to shame women for being bad with money. I mean, they usually come from poor backgrounds, and suddenly when you have a lot, knowing how to manage that and knowing how to do that well is not going to be, common. So these are some things to consider.
Wie viele Jahren machst du das jetzt hier schon?
Seit letztes Jahr April. Also jetzt knapp ein Jahr.
Und warum hast du dich entschieden, diesen Job zu machen?
Weil ich meinen Spaß dran habe.
Maybe she does. I don't know. I can't tell you. In the context of an ad campaign, we at very least have to put a question mark behind it. If you wanted to know how she actually feels, you'd have to ask her 10 years later when has been out for a while. Then maybe you'll know the truth. And if she still says she loved it, then I'm not saying those women don't exist. But yeah, in the context of how it's being presented to us, it's dubious.
Und das Finanzielle natürlich auch, aber es ist nicht nur das Finanzielle, es ist schon schön, wenn man damit leben kann, wenn man damit umgehen kann und vor allen Dingen auch sich seine Gäste irgendwo aussuchen kann und nicht muss. Und deswegen arbeite ich auch vorzüglich in FKK-Clubs, weil da hat man immer die Freiheit zu wählen und auch mal Nein zu sagen und dankend abzulehnen. Und das hat man in einigen anderen Läden nicht.
I'm just clocking this as I'm editing, but it sounds like she was in brothels where she wasn't allowed to turn down specific Johns. That is a legal criteria for human trafficking. If that's something that happened to her, then she has been a victim of human trafficking. And so this is relevant on multiple levels because, one, it shows you how it's possible that this woman, who certainly doesn't see herself as a victim of human trafficking, could move from a situation that's actually illegal into one that is legal, even though we know trafficking also happened at that brothel. Let's assume she wasn't a victim of that. Right? The complexity of how human trafficking can turn into legal prostitution and vice versa with changing criteria or aspects. And how even the German women who speak the language don't know their rights. Like what happened to her was illegal. This language of like choosing guests, etc., it really messes with your head. Like as I'm listening to it, even though I'm fully aware of how the industry works, I'm still sort of lulled in and processing everything that's being said with a certain delay, like having to translate everything in my brain. What did she actually just say? She just described trafficking. Maybe I'll leave it here and we'll continue another time. What do you guys think about what you're seeing here? Am I missing something? Is there something important to consider? Again, watching this, I sometimes forget about it watching it because it like lulls you in, right? That this was a highly criminal business. That doesn't mean that every single woman in there was trafficked, right? There's multiple paths in and out of the brothel, but you don't know. We don't know which one of these women, what their real story is. There's the format doesn't permit us to know that that's the truth. And I think there's so many people who watch these formats and they're like, but the woman said she loves it, and that's it. They just hear that one sentence. They don't consider any of the other context. They don't go Google that brothel, see if it's been busted for anything. They don't engage with it beyond that. Because if that's the only thing that you look at, then you just be like, oh, well, I saw this one woman, she said she loved it. You project her face, her story onto all the other anonymous women you've never heard from. And then you sleep better at night. I'm interested to see if they're going to be interviewing some sex buyers. I hope they do. I'm very curious. So far, it's been an odd mix of, honesty and advertising, sort of going back and forth. In that sense, it's interesting, though, of course, gross and depressing. Okay, see you next time.